Now that we have a crafting system in place, we finally really should be looking into having equipment for the player as well. As a fair warning, while a lot of the code that we have set up for this entire system has been fairly modular and reusable in a lot of places to scale things up, this is going to be a little bit more hard-coded, and that is because it's going to be for the player equipment or character equipment, and by and large I don't think you're going to need a lot of flexibility in that. You set that up once and then it just kind of works, right? So no use in overcomplicating things too much. What we're going to do is, first and foremost, I am going to go in my inventory component and we're going to make a child of that, and that child is going to be the equipment component. And the reason that we do that is fairly simply because we're going to add a couple of like getting functions to get the stats from those equipment items. We're not actually going to be doing anything very special with this. We're just going to be treating mostly the equipment thing as just another inventory component, which brings me to my third person character blueprint here, and we're going to open that up and just add another component, and this time we'll add an equipment component, which again is just going to function as yet another inventory component. There is a argument to be made here that if we go into the equipment component itself and we select class defaults, we can see the inventory size. You probably want to set this to only having as many slots as you have equipment things. So that will be a helmet, chest plates, like leggings, boots, maybe gloves, and then a shield and a sword, for instance. So that would be 7 inventory slots is what we want for this one. And as you can tell, the equipment is just going to exist in normal inventory slots. We're not going to make special slots for those, which we put those in, because that would require a lot of reworking and adding on top and adding new code, and that's generally not really worth it. So we're just going to reuse the existing inventory functionality, and we're just going to kind of have to remember that inventory slot 0 is the helmet, and then 1 is the chest plate, and then 2 will be the legs, and then 3 will be the boots, 4 will be the gloves, and or 5 or whatever, and so on and so forth. That's just the easiest way that we're going to go about doing this. All that said, let's go into our player inventory screen and add in our equipment here. So if we can find the player inventory, there we go. We already have the crafting system in there as well, and we're going to be adding some more now. So let's put this into the overlay, and we're going to put that overlay on the right hand side of the screen. You might want to swap this around with the crafting, having them crafting all the way to the right instead. That's entirely up to you. You could of course make this all into separate screens as well if you prefer. I like having everything just on one screen available for us. And then we're going to be putting in our item slots. So we put in just loose item slots. We're not going to be putting in like an item array or an item grid or whatever, because that will just add them in a grid, and we want these to be a little bit more special. So the way we're going to do this is we're just going to add like 7 of them. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All of them are on top of each other, and let's give them names. So this is the helmets slots, chest slots, legs slots, boots slots, gloves slots, weapon slots, and then we also have the shield slots. And if you have any other things, like maybe other types of accessories like rings or necklaces or whatever else, of course you can add as many of these as you need. And then we just kind of position these in a way that makes sense. So this will be outlined to the middle, and then have maybe a little bit of padding to the top. And really, I think all of them are going to be outlined to the middle. So let's stick with that. And then the chest will have a little bit more padding to the top. So let's say that's 150 or something. And then the legs will be about 300 padded from the top. And the boots will be even more. So let's say that is 450. And then the gloves will probably like put next to the boots or something. I'm just kind of going off the item layout that you have in a game like RuneScape, right? So we'll put this also at 450 from the top, and then padding to the right will be like 150, so that it ends up over there. Then the weapon slots will be, this is like 10, 150. So that probably will be like 200 from the top, something like that. Maybe like 250, 220. 220 seems good. And then 150 to the right. And then the shield slot will put in, I think we said 220 from the top, right? Yeah. And then 150 to the left. So now we have this overlay here that we can move around as one whole thing fairly easily. We can like resize it quite easily as well. At some point, of course, you resize this thing out of existence, so there's that. Not much you can do about that. And actually, let's maybe like put this down lower a little bit. We can make it a little bit more thin, and realistically you can put this wherever you want. Anyway, for now, this is what we're going to be doing with this, and we want to make sure that all of these item slots are also marked as is variable, which they are. So now if we go over into the event graph, we need to set the inventory component for all of them. Since they don't exist in an item grid, some of the things that the item grid does for us, we need to manually set up. So we kind of just get all of these. So all of the equipment slots that we have made, we just get references to them from our variable stack. And then we can fairly easily just make an array out of them, just to keep things a little bit more clean. And then we can use a for each loop to set the inventory component that these are aligned to. And we don't need that last one. Do make sure that we actually set these up in the order though that we want, because I just put them in randomly now. We don't actually want to do that. I wanted to have helmet slot at 0, and then I wanted to have the chest slots at 1, so that makes sense. And then I wanted to have the legs slots in 2, the boots in 3, the gloves in 4, the weapon in 5, and the shield in 6. So let's rearrange those real quick, because we're going to loop through this a for each loop. So it's going to iterate over these in the order that they exist in the array. Let's do a for each loop. On completed, we'll do just everything else that we usually do. But on startup, what we want to do is loop body. We get the array element and we set the inventory component. And the inventory component will be the equipment inventory from the player. So it'll be a new variable. Let's just copy over the player inventory variable and call it player equipment inventory. And that's just going to be the inventory component for the slots individually. Now, before we forget, we have this thing as instance editable and expose on spawn. So let's go back into the third person character, and somewhere here in the begin play function that we made a while ago, we have the create WBP inventory player widget, which now has the player inventory equipment. So I'll just put our equipment components into that. And there we go. For all intents and purposes, we can just keep this as an inventory component reference. You could specifically make this an equipment component reference as well if you need to access any of that for any reason. We're not going to do that. Now, we want to select all of these slots, and we want to make sure that for all of them, allow drag is set to true. We have that bool on there, whether or not inventory slots are allowed to interface with our drag drop system, which is not really a drag and drop system anymore. It's more like a click and click system. But by default, that's set to false. We just want to make sure that it's set to true for all of them, and now it is. There still is a couple of issues though, and that is if we pick up some items, we can put in any item that we want, and it probably won't actually display very well. You see, it just kind of disappears. They are in this inventory component now, but since this isn't part of a inventory grid, it doesn't refresh all of these slots anytime the inventory component changes, which is a little bit annoying. And we can't even take things out because technically speaking, the slots themselves don't know that they have anything in them either. So there's a little bit of extra work that we need to do to get these individual slots working out just like they would with a normal inventory component here. But luckily, it's not that difficult. We need to set up a couple of things in the actual item slots blueprint that we have here. So you will remember that we have the on preview mouse button down, which was really quite big. Some of this probably could do with being collapsed into its own functions, to be very frank with you. I also remember that we have this on drag detected and on drop detected, which I never removed. We're not using that anymore, so we can just remove those. Same in the event graph, we have this like wait for drop operation, which is part of the old system. We don't use that anymore, we can just get rid of it. And just to prove to you that that didn't actually break anything, we can pick up some items, and our normal inventory system still works perfectly fine. Anyway, back on mouse preview button down. We need to add in a couple of more things. The item slot itself is going to have a concept of being able to filter an item. So we're going to set this as a class filter, and the class filter is going to be of type BP item, and it will be a class reference. So this way we can say, hey, only weapons are allowed in this slot, and only helmets are allowed in this slot. And that way, if you, for instance, have a door in one of your levels that needs a key in it, you can give it a little interface and set that specific item slot to only take in a item of the type class key. So it is actually very expandable as a result of that anyway. We do want to expose that, obviously. And let's just drag this in here, and we'll make this a equal. And we'll also check if this is a valid class. So if we put a AND boolean between those, it's going to be checking both of them. And then we can just select whatever class we need here. So we'll just collapse that quickly into a function, check class filter. And that function will mark that as pure because we don't need any execution here. And we will take the selected class from the equals comparison thing, make that an input and call it class filter. And then we will add a return node, which will just hook up directly. And that will return the output of this AND. And then we'll also put in just the valid class in and of itself as an output. And we'll call this one a has filter and this one matching filter, which I suppose means that we don't need this AND boolean actually. We just need to check whether or not they match. And that gives us this handy little function here, which we can put in any class that we want whatsoever. We actually probably want to set that to only taking in BP item classes, specifically a class reference, so that we can't put in any other objects like other actors or other assets or whatever. Just makes the drop-down menu a little bit more useful. As you can see, now it only gives you the items, so we can put in any class that we want, and it's going to tell us, hey, do we have a filter to begin with? And do we have a matching input to the filter that we're looking for? And the way we're going to be using that is after our drag drop operation, and we have our drag drop item slot, we check whether or not that is valid. If it is valid, we get the inventory out of that drag and drop operation. We split that structure pin open, and then we get that item asset and we try to get the class from that. And this is going to allow us to filter on the input class. So first and foremost, I want to check whether or not we have a class filter to begin with, because if we don't, we can just move right on to the pre-existing code without any trouble, because obviously that means that we just have a normal inventory slot. But if we do have a filter, we want to check whether or not the filter that we have is matching with our input. Because if it is not, we don't want to do anything. We just don't hook anything up to this false node. If it is true, however, then we also do the rest of our stuff. And now we can go back into our inventory here and start putting in our class filters. I don't have class filters at the moment or different classes for specifically helmets and specifically chest plates, but you can easily make those. For now, let's just put in a filter here on the weapon. And that doesn't quite fix all of our issues, but it does allow us now to filter on specific classes. So you will note that if I pick up the potion, I can't actually interact with the item slot that has a class filter on it, but these ones who don't have a class filter on it still just kind of make it disappear. We'll worry about that in a moment. But if I pick up the sword, which is a weapon, it will disappear into this slot. So it is actively and correctly filtering on the items class. And luckily, everything else that we need to do is fairly easy. So let's go back into the event graph for the item slot itself. And we have this pre-construct thing, which just kind of sets up all of the visual information for our inventory slot. We're just going to add a custom event, and we're going to call that redraw item slot, and plug that into the exact same stuff. That way, we can call all of this functionality again whenever we want to. And now we just need to go down a couple of these branches and add that redraw item slot, as well as manually setting the value of the inventory slots. And then we have a functioning system. So the first branch that we need to go down is in here. We check if the inventory slot already has an item. If that is not true, we're clicking on an empty inventory slot, and we simply just need to put a new item in that existing stack. The code that exists here, we can just keep that going. The only thing we need to do is we need to get the inventory slots struct that we have here, and we need to set it to the same value that we put into the put in new item stack function that we have here, so that the inventory slot itself is also aware of it having been updated, because it's going to have the inventory components be updated, but since this thing is not related to an item grid that automatically redraws itself whenever there's an update to the inventory, we need to manually set the inventory slot itself to have new information, and then also manually say we want to redraw this item slot. And this will now allow us to actually fully be interactable with the weapon slots in the most easy way. So we can actually put it into the weapon slot here, and we can actually take it out. You will note that taking it out doesn't actually take it out yet, so we have infinite sword now. There's a little bit more work to be done there, but we can put things into the slot now. And again, these ones don't have any filters, so you can put anything into them at all. And these are now just item duplication slots, so let's take care of that. The next branch that we can go down is if there is already an item in this slot, right? Then the next thing we check is whether or not that item is the same item as the item that we're trying to put into it. If it is, it's going to try to merge these stacks, but since the equipment is likely always going to be unstackable, this will always return as not being successful, so the inventory slot that we're working with still will have an item, and we'll just like redraw its item. So we don't really need to do anything up in this branch. But if that is not true, you want to swap around the two items. So we do actually need to change some things in here. We have our inventory slot that's going to be set to a temporary holding storage for that inventory slot while we swap the items around. Then we run the put in new inventory stack. And then before we set the temporary item back to the inventory slot in the drag drop item, what we want to do is we want to set the inventory slot in the event graph directly, because this is going to be the inventory slot of the thing that we just clicked on. And that is once again going to get the value of our player character drag drop slots, inventory slots. The new one that we make from that, we're going to put into the inventory slot of the thing that we just clicked on. And then at the very end here, we will redraw the item slots. And then in the very last branch that we have here, we want to go back a little bit more. And that is all the way back to this is valid check. And our left mouse button is true. You could also put this into the right mouse button if you wanted to, but we're not going to for now. That means that we're clicking on an empty inventory slot, which means that we're taking the inventory out of that slot to put it somewhere else. So at the very end here, we simply just put a inventory slot setting node, leave it empty so that it creates an entirely empty inventory slot. And then as with the other ones as well, we redraw the item slots. Again, if you wanted to, you very much could also do that here. If you want to have filterable slots that also allow for stackable items in it, that might complicate things up here a little bit as well. I haven't actually tried that because I'm doing this for a equipment system, which means that for the most part, I'm just assuming that whatever you're going to be filtering on is not going to be stackable. So we just kind of don't deal with that. But you very much could also, at the very end here, add in a inventory slot setting, and we'd set that to something here. So we would make a new inventory slot based on the old values here, so we can just put the has items through, and then the stack size would be the stack size minus the amount that we subtracted. The item would be the same, and the index would still be the same. You could set that this way, and then at the very end here, as always, manually redraw the item slots. In theory, that should work fairly fine now. We can test that in a moment, I suppose. Let's just say that our helmet slot is going to be filtering on our consumable class so that we can test that as well. This is going to be live testing because I have not tried this before, but we can pick up both of these potions and then the sword. And first and foremost, the sword, we can put it in and pull it back out. And then we can put this in the head slot. And in theory, we should be able to put one out of that. So that just straight up works. These ones don't seem to be showing the stack size in them though, which might be due to the fact that in the third person character, we needed to get the equipment component and also construct the inventory through a function. I don't actually know why we don't just do that within the inventory itself directly, but we might as well just move some of this stuff a little bit to the right. We only ever set the text number to being invisible, and we never seem to set it back to becoming visible, strangely enough. So we probably should have put that in somewhere earlier. In this case, I guess it doesn't really matter for the normal inventory system because it redraws all the inventory slots anyway, like from scratch. But now that we're redrawing existing inventory slots, I guess it does make a difference. So if you do want the stack size to show in your equipment slots as well, that is the way that you fix that. You can see I have one sword in here and 2 potions in there. Especially if you have like an equipment slot for potions, right? That might be quite relevant. And you can of course set this on a per thing basis. So you can like put this into a branch with a bool, whether or not it should show the numbers for these individual slots. I guess for now we actually might as well implement that. It's not that difficult. We do a branch, we do a promoter variable, show item numbers, expose that. If true, we do that. If false, we just move on. Just as easy as that, really. We compile, we make sure that the default value would be true. And then for all of these, I will select them and set that to false. So now at this point, it would just be a matter of going into my items and getting my armor class, for instance, and making child classes of this. So let's say we have armor helmets, and we can just make siblings of those by just copying helmets. And then we have chest plates, we'll have legs, we'll have boots, we'll have gloves, and we'll have a shield, which I also just make armor. If you have something like dual wielded weapons, you might want to upgrade this filtering system to allow in a array of filters to check, hey, if it is part of one of these. And then you can also like make an offhand weapon. Maybe instead you can make your shield class take in a damage value as well, so that the offhand weapons are technically just still shields that give you an attack bonus, something like that. But now that we have all these in place, we can fairly easily say, hey, this one only takes in helmets, this one only takes in chest plates, this one only takes in legs, this one only takes in boots, this one only takes in gloves, and this one will only take in a shield. And I'll go into the item assets. I'll just make a like second sword here real quick with a different icon. So the icon for this different sword will just be this temporary one, just to show you that the swapping of items also works, because we haven't really highlighted that yet. So copy over this world item, we'll make this sword 2, and I'll pick both of them up and I'll just swap them around in the inventory slot to show you. And then we'll have a working equipment system. So we can put this into there, and then we can just swap them around easily like that. And of course, this can go into none of these slots because they are being filtered on a class basis. So congratulations, we have an equipment system. Now, you can, of course, then go into your equipment components and make a function, something like get armor stats, and there we can get the inventory array, for which we can do a for each loop, of course. And then in the array elements, we'll break that. We'll check if the item is a cast to armor. And we can then also, if we wanted to, make one specifically for boots, specifically for chest plate, and so on and so forth. For this one, we'll just check all of the armors, make a local variable, total defense, something like that, make that a float. Total defense will be set to our defense, plus the defense from the item that we're looking at. And if we run into any items that are not armor, it's just not going to succeed with this cast, so this won't ever happen. And then at the very end, we can simply return the defense that we have in total. And that's a very easy thing that we can now do on our equipment components to just get the entire set of armor stats. And if you have multiple things that are relevant, you can just make it into a struct. And at this point, we're getting into it. Really depends on the game you're making, what you want to do with this. But we have an equipment system now. So we're getting very close to having, I think, a completed inventory system, at least a completed part 2 of this series. Maybe at some point we'll do a even deeper dive with more advanced stuff. But we're going to be dealing with metadata soon. And then we're going to be dealing with saving your inventory, because that's quite an important thing. And that is going to be it for now, though. So I will see you all back with the next video in this series. And if you want to have the project files, the one that I'm working on right now, or the completed one with everything implemented and things being a little bit more organized and commented and stuff like that, there's a link down below in the description to the Patreon and for YouTube members to download the project files. And for the full course, if you're watching this in the future, it should be all up on the YouTube channel already. But if you're watching this shortly after it was uploaded, there will be a link down below in the description to the Patreon where you can find the full course. And a very big thank you to all of my Patreons. You can see them on screen right now. If you want to help out supporting the channel, there's a link down below in the description to the Patreon page. A huge thank you to my Cave Student tier supporters, Earl Monseval Erno, and my Cave Digger tier supporters, Sir J. Thomas,